Welcome. This is DA Sports. I'm your host, DASASIN. Thank you. This is episode number 41. Now, in today's episode, we got a couple of things to get into. Of course, we got to recap NFL Championship Week, go over each game individually, go over how I did in my picks overall, and a sneak preview into what's to expect over the next couple of weeks leading up to the Super Bowl. Then, of course, we're going to finish this week's episode with my top 5 and worst 5 NBA rankings as of Monday, January 27th. So that will be as of the end of the day, Monday, January 27th. So the games from Monday will be included with the records and ranking that I'm talking about. The games from today, Tuesday, the day I'm recording this, will not be included. So just keep that in mind. So let's get into it. So for starters, we got to recap Championship Week football. Now, of course, we had 2 huge games on Sunday. Both games were exciting. 2 different types of exciting, but nonetheless, both games were exciting and left us with a lot to look forward to as we head into Super Bowl week in just under 2 weeks. So for starters, going in chronological order, we got to start with the NFC Championship game that was between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Washington Commanders. Now, before I get into this game individually, as far as my picks go, I did get both right. I picked the Eagles and the Chiefs to win their games. They did win. So I was 2-0 this week. And not to mention that before the playoffs started, I did predict that the Chiefs and the Eagles would make it to the Super Bowl. So I was also right. And I did pick the Chiefs to go to the Super Bowl before the season started. So I was right about that too. So just, pat on the back kind of thing. But anyway, going back into this game specifically, the Eagles were favored to win by 6 points. Now, the part that I was wrong about this game is I thought the game was going to be close. I said the Eagles weren't going to cover the spread. I was wrong. I was right that the Eagles would win. I was wrong that they would cover the spread. And it's funny because ironically, the thing that I think led the most to the point differential being so large was the thing that I've been harping on the last 2 weeks in terms of being a huge difference maker when it comes to crucial football games, and doubly so when it comes to the playoffs, and that's turnovers. Anytime you lose the turnover battle, it's hard to win games. In playoff football, it's even harder to win games. And then even harder when that turnover battle is as large of a margin as it was in this game between the Eagles and Commanders. It seemed like every time the Commanders thought they could get back into the game, they turned the ball over. Whether it be a fumble. Actually, I think all of them were fumbles. And the fumbles weren't like somebody was really being careless. It was really forced fumbles by the Eagles. They were very aggressive, making the most out of every opportunity, every tackle, every change of position by somebody on the Commanders running with the ball. Somebody was punching at the ball, and they were super effective. I could tell it was something that they clearly studied and realized that they could be successful at, and they were, and it changed the game huge. The final score in that game was 55-23, so absolute slaughter. You know it's bad when it's an NFC Championship game and the backups are playing in the fourth quarter. Like if your backup quarterback and third string running back are playing in the end of an NFC Championship game, that means that the game wasn't close at all. And that's essentially what happened. The Eagles were dominant. They were dominant on their defensive line. They were dominant on their offensive line. And more importantly, they were dominant with their running game. Saquon Barkley went absolutely bananas. It was very telling from the first quarter that this game was probably going to get to this point and be out of hand. If you look at the way the game started, the Commanders got the opening kickoff. They drove down the field. I believe it was like an 18-play drive that settled for a field goal. The crucial part was, I believe on that opening drive, they went for it on fourth down twice and got it. And then still, when they got inside the 10-yard line, they got stopped on fourth down and then kicked a field goal. Now, I'm not necessarily blaming them for kicking a field goal. You know, at some point you got to just like, okay, let's take the points, right? And trust that your defense is going to be somewhat effective. But it's really a backbreaker when you take 18 plays to drive all the way down the field and have to settle for a field goal. Then you kick the ball to Philadelphia, and on their very first play, their running back scores a touchdown on a rushing play where essentially he broke like 4 tackles. So that after that play from Saquon happened, I believe it was a 60-yard run on the opening play, I was like, yeah, this is not good. This game's going to get out of hand. Because it showed one team had to do so much just to put points on the board, where the other team, like, was, I won't say it's a throwaway play, but I mean, like, it was just a regular toss play. Just a regular toss play to open up, just like, okay, let's get some yardage. Let's see, you know, how they're flowing to the ball. Let's see how our blocking schemes are going to match up, so on and so forth. And they take it to the house. People are missing tackles on the first play of the game when everybody is fresh. There's no fatigue setting in. Like, that's when, you know, tackling is the easiest. It's the fourth quarter in cold games where tackling gets really difficult because you're battered, you're bruised, you're tired, you know, you're morally distraught a little bit. First play of the game, you're hyped, you're warm, you're ready to go. You got all this excitement. Your offense just scored. That's when you should be flying around, wrapping up. Nope. They just couldn't tackle at all. And Saquon made them look like fools and then proceeded to do that for the rest of the game until they pulled him out because they didn't need him anymore. So, great win for Philadelphia. I said from, I think it was like not the middle of the season, probably like the third quarter of the season, that Philadelphia was showing that they are probably the most complete team in football, mainly because that was about the time when their defense really started to pick it up. Early in the season, people were kind of doubting them, you know, having success come playoff time because their defense was very young and they were making a lot of mistakes. But as the season progressed, their defense got more and more physical. They held teams to not many points, and they were much more productive. And, yeah, they looked like a potent team through all facets of the game. It's going to be interesting to see what they do come Super Bowl time. Now, the second game as a part of championship week was the AFC championship game. That was between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Buffalo Bills. Now, this game, like I mentioned earlier, I was right about. I did pick the Chiefs to win. I did pick the Chiefs to cover the spread, and they did exactly that. I said they were going to win by 3 points, and they won by 3 points. My score was also pretty close. My final score was 30-27. The actual final score was 32-29, so 2 points off on each team's score. And so, yeah, I was pretty much spot on when it came to that one. The only thing I was wrong about is that I said the game was going to go into overtime. It didn't, but it was definitely a great game to watch. Kansas City got out in front to start the game. Then they were able to hold Buffalo to a field goal. Then they were driving to score a touchdown. The way the game started, Kansas City's first couple of drives, it looked like there was a potential for it to get out of hand. But then they had the one turnover that basically gave Buffalo momentum, so that not only were they able to utilize the fumble as a means to stop the Chiefs from scoring, they were able to score and then take the lead. Now, the Chiefs did come back and take the lead again, but from that point, it was back and forth. I think that turnover really boosted Buffalo's morale in the sense of like, okay, we can get a stop. It wasn't a stop in terms of stopping their plays, but nonetheless, they stopped them from scoring by any means necessary, and that's what you're trying to do. So I think that gave them a lot of momentum. And overall, Josh Allen played well. Another game where he's going down as playing a decent enough game, but not being able to get over the hump against Mahomes. Now, there's a couple things in regards to this game because, as usual, everybody wants the weekly clickbait of what happened with calls in the Chiefs game. So, there were a couple calls that have been debated the most. I'll go over two of them. So, the first one was the pass to Worthy that I believe it was it Taylor Rapp? No, because I think he was out at that point. Can't remember. But one of the DBs from Buffalo jumped up and almost had an interception, but Worthy had his hand on the ball. His right hand was on the ball. His left hand was bracing for the fall. And at the high point, the guy in Buffalo had two hands on the ball. But as they started to come down, one of his hands came off, and the other hand that was on it didn't have a grip on the ball, while Worthy's hand, on the other hand, was pinning the ball to his chest with the Buffalo's arm in between, right? Then people were talking about, the ball ended up touching the ground before Worthy rolled over and secured the ball on top of himself. But people were saying it shouldn't have been a catch. Some people even stupid enough saying it should have been an interception, which doesn't make any sense because the Buffalo defender never came down with possession, so there's no way in hell it would be an interception. Also, there was a penalty on the play by Buffalo, so even if they would have ruled that wasn't a catch, Kansas City still would have got the ball, still would have had the ball, and it would have been a first down. So, inevitably, them scoring on that drive, based on how they had been playing, they probably still were going to score anyway. It just would have changed the time in which they scored. So, for one, it's not that impactful. For two, in terms of the rule, anybody who knows football knows that if you control the ball while going to the ground and the ball hits the ground but doesn't move, it's still a catch. And that's exactly what happened. The ground can't aid in your possession of the catch. So if you're coming to the ground with the catch and then the ball moves further up your arm or in your hand or jostles and it looks like that helped you secure it, then yes, it's not a catch. But if you have the ball pinned and you hit the ground and part of the ball touches the ground, but it doesn't move from hitting the ground, then you clearly have control over the ball and it's still a catch. Everybody who knows football knows that that's the case. So anybody whining otherwise that it wasn't a catch doesn't know football and needs to just shut up. Okay. Now, the other call that people are debating is the fourth down quarterback sneak that they ran with Josh Allen. At the time, Buffalo was up by 1. It was 22-21. They had been doing the same thing that they had been trying, not only just in this game, but all season. Even I, watching the game, knew when they went to go for a tush push that Josh Allen was going to try to go over the left guard. That's what they've done all year. It's been the same. So if I know it, I know how prepared the Chiefs are. They definitely had to know it. And they played it right. And most of the times that they ran that play in the game, it got stopped because they knew exactly where he was going. And because he's so tall and because he tries to do it so upright, he doesn't really have leverage. So a lot of people who never play football don't understand how important leverage is. It doesn't matter how big you are, how strong you are, how fast you are. If somebody coming in for a tackle has better leverage, they're going to tackle you. And if you're running a sneak play and you're up high, but everybody who's down below knows where you're going and they can push people back in that direction, it's going to prevent you from getting yards. That's why the key in Philadelphia always getting it with the tush push is they stay low. You don't see Jalen Hurts come up high when he's doing the tush push. He gets down low where the linemen are so he can push low and drive with their legs. That's not how Josh Allen does it, and he paid the price for it. Now, in terms of the call, there are so many different videos going by where people are drawing imaginary lines and saying, well, if you make this guy invisible, you can see that the ball would have been over the line and so on and so forth. Well, guess what? In real life, you can't make anybody invisible. So all you can go by is an estimate of where you think the ball is based on where you think his body is. And you can clearly see from the viewpoint of the sideline of the guy who called him short, that from his viewpoint, it looks like he's short. From the other side, it looks like he could have been on the line, which is why both refs had two different lines. But the person from the side that had it short is the call that they go by in that specific instance. So he called him short. And clearly, going to replay, there's no angle that clearly defined, like, yes, he's over the line. People were talking about the over the top line, but the over the top line is not directly down the line, which skews your viewpoint. So if anybody's ever poured water into a measuring cup, you know that if you stand straight up while the cup is on the counter and you look to see if it's matching a line, you might think it is, but then if you go eye level with it, you realize, like, oh, it's not, right? The same thing applies with down markers. If you're not directly perpendicular to the line, you can't really tell exactly if it's on the line. So the side judges had the best chance, and based on what they saw and based on the review, it had to remain the same. So really, again, stop crying about the call. It was not a terrible call. Get over it. The most important thing to me, though, is even with all of these calls, the one thing that we always say is the reason why Mahomes beats Josh Allen is because he's much more clutch, right? The Chiefs went up by 7, 29-22. Buffalo got the ball, drove down the field, and scored, tied the game at 29. So Josh Allen and the offense did their job. Now, the key point about that drive that people seem to have forgot is that they ran the ball, I think, every play on that drive, or if not every play, really close to every play on that drive in getting that touchdown. Why they then went away for that the next time they had the ball, I don't know, but that's what they did. But nonetheless, they scored. They tied the game at 29. Then, Mahomes being Mahomes, he drives his team down, tries to milk as much clock as possible, isn't able to get a touchdown because the Chiefs get a penalty on first down and pushed him back, and that put them in a hole, so they had to settle for a field goal. Now, the Chiefs are up 3, kicking the ball to Buffalo. I believe Buffalo had all 3 timeouts, and I think like 2 minutes plus. So not only did they have all their timeouts, but they also had the 2-minute warning. If you switch those roles, right? Let's say Buffalo is up 32-29. The Chiefs are getting the ball, all their timeouts in that situation. How many people think Mahomes doesn't get them in at least field goal range to kick the field goal and send it to overtime? Probably nobody. Why? Because we know Mahomes is clutch. Josh Allen, on the other hand, had the same opportunity, couldn't get the job done. That last 4 sequence of plays, first down was an incomplete, second down was an incomplete, third down was a 5-yard completion, and fourth down was an incomplete. Now, on the fourth down play, for one, got to give credit to Spags. He called a perfect blitz. It was a zone blitz, and he hid the zone blitz because when they tried to motion to identify if it was man or zone, nobody moved. And the blitz came from a corner who was lined up over the slot receiver. So it looked like, oh, we were just in a man or like a man coverage where they shifted, or they were in a press zone. But that wasn't the case. They were in a blitz, a zone blitz, from the corner. It was perfectly disguised. They also knew the tendency that Josh Allen likes to roll right when he panics. If you actually watch the play back, he has a slant from the slot receiver on his right that's coming across the middle that would be wide open if he just sat in the pocket and threw the ball. And he's at least getting the first down. But he saw the blitz after the ball was snapped. He panicked, and as Spags predicted, he tried to roll right, which ran him right into the blitz, which then he realized, like, oh, now I have to just backpedal. Now, to his credit, he was able to backpedal enough to buy enough time to find a player who had some space down the field and to throw the ball up high enough to where he had enough loft to give him a chance to get it. And to his credit, Dalton Kincaid was able to stop his path and try to get back to the ball, and he dove and he missed the pass. So I don't know how they scored it in terms of official record book, if it went down as a drop or not, but it was a difficult catch either way. And essentially that ended the game. But at the end of the day, I put some of the blame of that drive on Josh Allen and some of it on the OC. But nonetheless, when it comes down to in most crucial games, one player executed and the other player didn't. And the Chiefs got the win, and they proved that they were the better team. So they move on to the Super Bowl. Now, this week, with the Super Bowl being 2 weeks out, I'm still going to give you the same schedule of shows, but it's not going to be until next week that I start to really dig into breaking down the Super Bowl matchups and my predictions and so on and so forth. For now, I will say that the game is the Chiefs are favored by 2 against the Eagles, and I think that the line is indicative of what it should be. So look forward to the next few episodes where I slowly dig in more and more to the matchup. Looking forward to the Super Bowl. All right, so lastly, we're going to quickly close out this episode with my top 5 and worst 5 NBA rankings as of Monday, January 27th. So at number 1, we got to go with the Oklahoma City Thunder. OKC is currently 37-8. They have the largest point differential of any team in the entire league. Their average margin for every game is a 12.3 victory. So that means that on average, out of all of their games, including losses, that they're winning their games by more than 12 points, which is astonishing. Like, that's a huge margin because they're playing all of the teams, and they're in the Western Conference, so they're playing more good teams than bad teams. You know, the Eastern Conference is not as bad as it was like 10 years ago, but it's still not comparable to the Western Conference, and yet OKC is just dominating the competition week in and week out, and they look like the best team in the league, and they definitely deserve to be at number 1. Just by comparison, the next best team with the largest point differential in their favor is less than 10 points. So they're the only team with a point differential that's double digits, and it's not 10, it's 12. So that should give you comparative speaking of how much better they are playing in comparison to everybody else. Now at number 2, this might surprise people, but I got to go with the Houston Rockets. That's right. The Houston Rockets right now are 31-14, and they have been on a tear. They, again, are another team that's kind of surprised people, but I kind of mentioned this in the preseason about how I expected them to be good, because if you looked at the way they finished the season, they finished strong. They kept winning. They were beating good teams. They almost made it to the playoffs, but just couldn't pull it off. But the team was really young. Now they kind of re-upped, got some more key players, and they've been playing excellent, and they look like a team that's going to be a problem for people to deal with. Case in point, their last 3 wins were against other top-tier teams. 1 against Boston, and then 2 games against Cleveland, who had, for most of the season, been the number 1 team in the league. So to beat Cleveland at home and in Cleveland, and to get a win against Boston, shows that this isn't like a fluky team. They've been playing tough, and they're capable of beating anybody on any given day. So they deserve to be at number 2 right now. Now at number 3 is one of those teams that I mentioned they beat recently, is the Cleveland Cavaliers. Cavaliers right now are 37-9. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the Cavs were number 1 for a long time. Then I think in the last ranking they dropped to 2 because OKC had just beat them, blew them out actually, when they went to OKC. And they've been sort of on a slide. Their last 10 games, they've been 5-5. So considering they only have 9 losses on the entire season, and 5 of those losses are within their last 10 games, it's showing that I wouldn't necessarily say they're coming down to earth. I still think that Cleveland is a good team, but they've kind of hit a stride where, you know, maybe they're looking forward to that All-Star break or what, but they definitely have lost some, so they're now down at number 3. Coming in at number 4, we got to go with the Boston Celtics. Now, the Celtics are 32-15. They have also been another team that has been in the top 5 pretty much all season, but they have been losing a lot recently. they actually have, out of their three most recent losses, they lost to Houston, as I mentioned, they lost to the Lakers, and they lost to the Atlanta Hawks. Matter of fact, they've lost to the Atlanta Hawks twice now this season. So these are teams. Now, Houston, I would say right now, is just a better team, which obviously is why I put them at 2 and Boston at 4. But losing to the Lakers and losing to the Hawks twice is not indicative of a team that it was the NBA favorite to win championship again this year. So they're still a top tier team, which is why they're at 4. But they have slid some, which is why they're not higher than 4. Now, rounding out the top 5 at number 5, I got to go with the New York Knicks. New York Knicks are currently 31 and 16, and they're currently on a 4-game winning streak, which surprisingly is actually the longest win streak in the league right now. It shows just how much parity there is in the league. Anybody being able to lose on any given day, because 4-game winning streak is not long at all, but that is the current longest streak in the NBA. So it's good for them because they did go through a lull also. So they seem to be getting it back together now, putting wins together. So they've risen back up to the 5th spot. Now for the worst 5 NBA rankings, starting off at 26, we got to go with the Charlotte Hornets. Now, Charlotte has gotten better as of recent. Their current record is 12 and 31, but in their last 10 games, they've been 5 and 5. So that's a plus. I mean, they only have 12 wins on the entire season, but 5 of them are in the last 10. So it shows that maybe they figured something out. Maybe they are gelling more together. They've been able to beat some decent teams, and they've gotten wins over teams that are in this ranking below them. But nonetheless, that's what's keeping them afloat. They still aren't quite high enough to move out of this bottom 5, but nonetheless, they deserve to be at 28 for right now. Now coming in at 29, I got to go with the New Orleans Pelicans. Now the Pelicans are 12 and 35, and they are currently on a 3-game losing streak. You'll see a trend with these last 4 teams in terms of progression and losing streaks and their ranking. So the Pelicans are on a 3-game losing streak, but they're just like Charlotte. They are also 5 and 5 in their last 10. So they've been getting it together. Obviously, a big part of that has been Zion coming back. He came back from injury, and then he played. Then they took him out for a little bit because they were saying something about conditioning, which doesn't make any sense to me, because if he needs conditioning, playing him in a game would give him conditioning, but whatever. That organization isn't really run very well, so whatever. But as of for now, they deserve to be at the 27 spot. Then coming in at 28 is the Utah Jazz. Utah Jazz are 10 and 34. As I was talking about that losing streak, they are currently on a 6-game losing streak, and they are 1 and 9 in their last 10 games. So they've pretty much settled in this bottom tier for this part of the season. I don't expect them to make it out of this bottom 5 at any point, but I think Utah pretty much planned this to be a rebuilding year, so that's what's going on. So they definitely deserve to be at the 28 spot. Then coming in at 29, we got to go with the Brooklyn Nets. Brooklyn Nets are 14 and 33. Back to that losing streak. They are on a 7-game losing streak, which is the second longest losing streak currently in the NBA. And they are also 1 and 9 in their last 10. So definitely been terrible. They played decent earlier in the season, but right now they've just been falling apart. They can't really get any wins. So they've dropped all the way to second to last. But thankfully, they are not last. Bringing in the rear at 30, got to go with the most horribly run franchise in the NBA, the Washington Wizards. I almost said Mystics. That's pretty bad. But the Washington Wizards are 6 and 39. They are 0 and 10 in their last 10. And they are on a 14-game losing streak. Ugh. It's just terrible. I don't know how fans even go to watch their games anymore. Like, what is the point? I guess you probably would go to watch the other team or something, but Yeah, this team is terrible. I think there's no chance that they make it out of this bottom spot for the entire season. Which will be really funny is if they stay as the worst record all season, but then they don't get the number one pick, which has been the case for most recent years. So it's like they don't even get to be rewarded with, being terrible. And like I said, this organization is run terribly. So yeah, they'll probably be here for the rest of the season and probably going into the next few seasons also. So that wraps it up for the top 5 and worst 5 rankings. That also wraps it up for this week's episode. I want to thank you all for tuning in. Please make sure you like and subscribe and share wherever possible. And I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Peace.